Geographers, welcome back. It's Unit 3, Cultural Patterns and Processes. If you're watching, well, maybe you were here for the live, maybe you weren't. If you weren't here, you're missing out because we are having a bunch of fun. We got people all over the world here, but we're going to be reviewing right now Unit 3, and everything we're talking about is aligning to that CED. So without further ado, let's get started at talking about Unit 3. And to start, we need to talk about culture because, you know, this is a culture unit. And I want to highlight a couple different types of culture to start. Now, the first we're going to talk about is material culture. So we have material culture and non-material culture. Let me know in the chat if you know the difference between them. So put down in the chat and I'll pin a comment up there, the difference between material culture and non-material culture. And while we're waiting on chat to be able to put something there, I'm also going to talk about subculture because culture is complex. There's different levels to culture. There's a lot that makes up culture. Our food, our religions, our languages, what clothes we're wearing, different traditions and rituals. All of these things are part of culture. Music, all of it is. Material is, let's see, we got some people here. Material is something that can be seen or worn. Non-material is ideology. That could work. Yeah. Material is physical objects. Non-material beliefs, things that society holds to be true. Correct. That would work. So awesome. We're getting a bunch of people in there around objects. Yes, yes. Different ways we can see these terms too. So material culture, again, like the chat was saying, physical objects, artifacts, things that hold value. So things that hold value for us as a society, or if we're looking at an individual as an individual. Remember, those non-material are going to be intangible items, then those social norms, language, symbols, rituals. And then subculture, I mentioned a little bit earlier. Subculture is a group inside another group, essentially. Easier way to put this is your school that you attend has a culture. There's something that makes your school unique. How people get to class, the vibe in your classrooms, the vibe in the school, all of that has a culture. Now, you have a subculture probably with your own friends. And actually, your AP Human Geography class probably has its own subculture inside the school's culture. That classroom environment that you have with those people in your class, not sure how big your class is, but how many people are in there, that creates a culture in its own. So that's a subculture, this group of people within a larger society or culture, and they share certain beliefs and values or practices. So that kind of forms over time there. All right, let's go on to our next part here. So got a couple of the vocab away. We're also going to talk about some of the perspectives. So remember, whenever we come in contact with other cultures, we are going to be viewing them. And there's different ways in which people perceive other cultures. We have ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. These are two terms you want to be familiar with for that AP exam. So make sure you have an idea about these. Cultural relativism, it's like putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You're trying to understand their culture from their point of view. Ethnocentrism, you're going to take your own beliefs, your own perspectives and standards, and you will then use that to judge another individual. So for example, if we look at what food is eaten around the world, if you hear that someone eats insects, a lot of different places around the world, they eat insects. And right away, you're like, that is disgusting. I would never do that. That's weird. That'd be more of like ethnocentrism. You're taking your own standards, your own perspective, and applying it there. Instead of cultural relativism, trying to understand, okay, well, why do they eat insects? What is the purpose there? Or is there a meaning? Is there some connection to a religion or a cultural trait that's been passed down or traditions? So that would be important. I do have, let's quick put this one up, kind of this graphic here. I like this little political cartoon of ethnocentrism. We got a chicken here saying, how do I get to the other side? And then the chicken on the other side is saying, what are you talking about? You are on the other side. So here we can see the chickens. They're looking from their own perspective. They're not trying to understand the broader step. They're not putting themselves on the other side there. So hopefully that helps out with you. All right, let's go on to our next one, which is the cultural landscape. I got a bunch of images here, and the cultural landscape, you want to, the AI pictures go crazy. I just like quick sided look over the chat. Yeah, I've been having some fun with AI, so I've been trying to make some more AI pictures. So you can oftentimes find a lot of errors in AI, which maybe gives you something to try and figure out there. But Cultural landscape, we're looking at these visible modifications on the natural environment. Now, I want to point that out. We have to have some modification. We have humans, society that has modified the environment. And the environment, oftentimes, we have this human environment interaction that we've talked about in other units. There's this back and forth. But we were seeing culture represented in our city landscapes, in our farms, in our rural areas, our urban areas, in our sparsely populated areas. We're seeing different evidence of that. If we go back to these photos, notice we can see here, we have different pictures. Anyone know what this place is, by the way? This would connect to one of our religions later on in this video. So let me know. I'll try to pin it on the screen in just a little bit there. So let me know there. But we can see different religious places for the cultural landscape. We can also see different types of resources that are used. Notice these houses and these buildings here are all pretty different. They give off a very different feel. This can tell us about a place. For example, observing the cultural landscape in this photo right here, I can see these buildings are kind of packed on top of each other. So they're very close. This lets me know that, well, there's probably a higher population density. I also noticed that the roofs are flat. So this would tell me it's probably in a climate that is a little bit more warm, or it's hot through the majority of the year. So that can give me insight there. The resources too could maybe give me some insight into the economic level of that country or of that place, compared to over here where I can see these buildings, these skyscrapers. I can see a lot of kind of modern clothing, jeans. We got shorts and stuff there. This looks like more global pop culture. So this would tell me this is a little bit more economically developed. Different things can show us stuff. Here I can see a type of agriculture that we'll talk about later on in our Unit 5. And actually, if you know this type of agriculture, let me know in the comments and I'll pin it as well. It is the Golden Temple. It is the Golden Temple. That is correct. So the Golden Temple is going to be where I am right now, and I will move there. So here's the Golden Temple, and the religion is the Sikhs. So we'll talk about that later. It would be the Sikhs. So Golden Temple and the Sikhs. Good job on that one. All right, let's see if I quick go up. Terrace farming. Wait, where is it? Yes, terrace farming would be that image. That's going to be a type of agriculture. We will talk about that later. So we got a bunch of people there with terrace farming. Awesome. Look at all the people. Great job, chat, today. Cool. Another thing, too, with cultural landscape that you're going to want to be familiar with is this term of sequin occupancy. So sequin occupancy, we're talking about how our past cultures, the people who are there, have really left their mark. So I got the picture here of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall still exists today. We're going to talk about the Berlin Wall again tomorrow for Unit 4 because the Berlin Wall is also a relic boundary. So we'll talk about that when we get into the types of boundaries. That's something you'll have to be familiar with. But sequin occupancy is ways in which our cultural landscape has been influenced from past cultural groups. So societies over time have left their mark. Oftentimes, a lot of buildings have significance and some meaning. And we can see that in sequin occupancy. So this is a vocab term you want to be familiar with. You definitely could see it on that AP exam. And it's one a lot of times students might forget about, but it's part of that cultural landscape. And you'll see this separate from that as well. So I just want to kind of highlight there. All right, next one is some more vocab. I'm going to just make it full screen so you can see it a little easier. Got some more AI art there. This is looking at our architecture. So different types of architecture. This is mentioned in the CED really briefly, but you want to be just kind of familiar. So we have our traditional architecture, which we can see. The AI tried to make this one as an example of traditional. Then this is going to be more modern, and then this would be postmodern. Don't ask how all this stuff's hanging up. There's clearly some structural issues here, but that's okay. Traditional architecture would be this style of home that's going to show more of these regional characteristics, oftentimes reflecting culture, oftentimes reflecting the history there. Modern architecture, the big focus there is on simplicity. It wants to try and have that functionality and simplicity there. And sometimes modern architecture has been criticized because we start to see a bunch of buildings that all look the same. And they lack that diversity of aesthetics. And they don't have as much of that cultural significance. And that's then where we get to postmodernism, which is now looking at this introduction again of trying to get these historical references, different diversity in the aesthetics, trying to create more of a unique look. So these are just different ways in which we build buildings, which will reflect culture again in that cultural landscape. We're looking at our cultural landscape of different places around the world. So important to note there. Another part of the cultural landscape and culture that we also want to be familiar with is our land use patterns. And I'll put the land use patterns up on the screen now. I can make it a little bit bigger here. We've talked about land use patterns before. They come up throughout a variety of different things in this class. So you want to be kind of familiar with it. But this is going to be how our land is modified. So modifying our land is going to be important here as we continue to see land change. That shows us what society values. So if you think about it, if I'm in a society and it's all agricultural land, that can tell me some things about the economy. It can tell me some things about the types of work that people are probably doing, the jobs that are there, the resources. It can even give me some insight probably into the density. And if we look at population, maybe even family size, all of this stuff kind of helps us being able to understand about a society. And I can make these observations just from looking at the land. So agriculture is going to be our food production. Commercial is going to be things like stores. If we're looking at like a Best Buy, a Target, a Walmart. Industrial is going to then be our manufacturing and production. Recreational, again, is going to be parks. You can see here we got like a trail. We could also have like a stadium, something that people are doing to kind of blow off steam. Residential, then again, we're going to have all the houses or apartment buildings, and that changes with density as well. And then transportation. What modes of transportation do we have? That can tell us insight as well about a culture. In the United States, we drive a lot. It's very common for people to drive 30 minutes, an hour to work. Other countries, that's completely unheard of. No one would drive an hour to work. People are a lot closer, depending on where we're living. In the US, we have less public transportation. If you go to London, if you go to Paris, if you go into France, they got public transportation all over. Most people take public transportation. They don't drive themselves. In the US, it's more unheard of to not drive. Unless you're in a big city like Chicago or New York or LA, those then you're going to rely more on public transportation. So all of this stuff can give us different insights about a place. So you want to make sure you spend a little bit of time on that there to make sure you understand it. All right, let's go on to our next part here. When we're looking at it, cultures and places. So a couple things with vocab that's going to come up. One, let me know in the comments what consists of a place. There's two characteristics that make up a place, kind of connecting back to the 5 themes of geography. So let me know in the comments, and then I'll try to pin something on the board for you, or on the screen, not the board. This isn't actually, we're not actually in school right now. So let me know there. It's not site and situation. I mean, site and situation have a factor there, but it would be, I just saw it. Here we go. This is the first one I saw. Human and physical. So our human characteristics and our physical characteristics. That is what makes up a place. Site and situation are also going to be factors, but there we're dealing more with absolute and relative. And next one to pin up on the skin, or up on the screen, we'll have site and situation. Let me know the difference between site and situation, and I'll pin that one on. So a place, as we're waiting for that, a place consists of our human and physical characteristics. And the more unique they are, the better the sense of place will be. So a sense of place, remember, is this kind of strong emotional connection that people often have with an area. You think about when you leave for a vacation and you come home, you're driving in and it feels like you're home. You recognize the sights, the smells, the sounds. It feels good to be back there. And as we go to different places, we can start to understand what is unique there. If you go to New York City, you're going to feel that bustle, that hustle, the lights, the sounds, the horns, the people walking, the smells of the different vendors. All of that creates a very unique sense of place and creates a very unique place. Now, sometimes we could have it where we have placelessness. Now, this would be when a place essentially lacks some of these unique characteristics. They don't have any unique human or physical characteristics that really stand out. So the place then doesn't really convey much to us. So it just kind of blends in with everything else. And this is one thing that's been kind of criticized with some of global culture as we start to see these multinational corporations diffuse, and all of a sudden downtown areas, they all look the same. Or when we start, particularly like in the United States, we build all these houses that look identical. Our neighborhoods lose some of that uniqueness. And all of a sudden, you wouldn't even be able to tell what state you're in because everything's looking the same. Another concept you want to be familiar with here when we're talking about place and we're looking at culture and that cultural landscape is going to be that built environment. So this could come up on the test. It's a vocab term, but this is those human-made structures that shape the physical characteristics of a place. So when you think about it, if you blank on the test and you see built environment, you can think of it this way. Built, we're building something, and the environment, we're building something in our environment. We have human-made structures. We are modifying it there. So we're looking at how the environment, how our buildings have been created. One last concept that I should talk about that could also be when we're talking about place is place making. So I talked about that sense of place and placelessness. Placemaking would be actually when a community is coming together and we're going to take some public space and we transform it for different activities or events. And we're trying to then create a community event, which can bring people together. So we could have some centripetal forces here. So centripetal forces kind of uniting there. Let me know in the comments, what is the difference between centripetal and centrifugal forces? Two more vocab terms that you'll need to know for this unit. Okay, trying to go down now for our site and situation. And then I'll have to go for the next one too, the centrifugal and there. Site is physical characteristics. Situation is relative. Correct. Yes. Site is an area. It is its exact location. And then situation describes its surrounding area and physical features. That would work. Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right. Quick going up to the start there. Centripetal, bringing together. Centrifugal, pushing apart. Yes, that would work there. Centripetal, a force that's binding together. Force that's pulling apart. Yes, those definitely work there. Cool. We got that. More concepts that we're learning here. One way to remember it too, and I'll quick say this again at the end when we talk about these. P for pull, we're pulling together. F for force, we're forcing apart. So if we're trying to remember the difference. On the AP test, we mentioned this yesterday. A lot of times you'll see questions. The College Board knows, hey, students will often mix up centrifugal and centripetal. So you're probably going to see, if you're going to see those on the test, you'll see those two together. They'll kind of be connected because they're trying to see, they're not trying to trick you, but they're trying to see, do you really know what centripetal forces are or what centrifugal forces are? So if you understand that, then you know the difference between them. So you want to make sure you know that. And I did mention this uniform landscape. These would be some examples to an extent here when we're looking at this. So here we have like a McDonald's, a Chipotle, a Starbucks. You can see up here like kind of these homes that are, we have different colors, but they're kind of all identical. This is becoming more of a uniform landscape. So here we're starting to all of a sudden see where we're losing some of that uniqueness of a place. If I put you in front of a Chipotle, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me what state you're in because they all look the same. And so this is homogenized, uniform. Be kind of familiar with those because you might see those used in a question. And this is, again, one of the things that's happened as global culture, as our pop culture, our modern culture continues to diffuse and spread. And this is also why some folk cultures and indigenous cultures will resist new things like the internet, computers and technology. They want to try and protect their unique culture, their unique languages and traditions, because the more and more they continue to become exposed to global and modern culture, then we start to see they start to lose certain aspects of their culture as we see acculturation, assimilation, and all of that start to happen there. So let's go on to our next thing real quick. If you are struggling with any of this and you need some extra practice, it's only like a 4-minute video, but all it is practice of looking at the cultural landscape. So you can kind of see a screenshot here. But all it is practice of looking at that cultural landscape and then being able to make these connections and being able to kind of make inferences about a place. This is also using photo analysis, a skill that you need for this AP test. So if you're interested, you can check it out. It's in the ultimate review packet, just a 4-minute video, but it's just practicing this particular skill and concept because FRQs have used some photos before where you've had to analyze it. Multiple choice questions definitely have. So you want to spend some time making sure you understand it. So if you're interested and you got that ultimate review packet after the stream, you can go check out that video and review it. Just make sure this is making sense for you. All righty, let's go on to our next thing there. Moving on. So up next is our types of diffusion. And we'll do another one in the chat that I'll pin. Let me know the different types of expansion diffusion. So expansion diffusion, I'll pin one of those there. But our two types of diffusion is relocation and expansion. So remember, relocation is the physical movement. We have a cultural group, a group of people. They're in place A. We're just going to move to place B. So we're physically just moving. Expansion, think of it like math. It's addition. It's this person-to-person contact. So what's starting to happen is actually we are expanding outwards. More and more people are practicing the trait. With relocation, that origin point often may actually diminish, because as someone's just moving from here to here, there's also less people practicing the trait. With expansion, that origin doesn't necessarily decrease because it is growing outward oftentimes. And not always in this direction. There could be hierarchical, a bunch of them. So there's differences there. Let's see. Someone saying, why are there ads? I'm not sure. I am literally just reading the notes. That might be a YouTube thing, so I can try to look and figure that out. So I apologize for that, but yeah, I'm not sure there. Okay, stimulus, contagious, hierarchical, and expansion. These are all different types. You also, it's more rare, but you could see reverse hierarchical as well. So that could also be a thing as well. Yeah, contagious, stimulus, relocation. Relocation would not be an example of expansion though. So it would be hierarchical. Stimulus, hierarchical, contagious. I'm the GOAT. Yes, you are. Way to rock it. Cool. Let's go to our types of diffusion then. Make sure these are making sense. So I'll put these up on the screen. Got some more AI out there because I want to make sure the different types of diffusion work for you and that it's making sense. So remember here, all of these types of diffusion are where we are seeing that origin point. It's not shrinking. It's this person-to-person contact. So more and more people are practicing these traits. Now, when you're on the AP test and when we are actually starting to get into situations, make sure you also are aware of how these could connect into the real world. You might have to have an example on an FRQ, or you might be shown something you have to identify. Or maybe you have like a scenario where you see, okay, this is what's happening, and I'm trying to figure out what type of diffusion it is. Or maybe a question's asking you, it's saying like, hey, which of the following is an example of contagious diffusion? So remember, with contagious, we're talking about that center point there. Everyone is going to be impacted. It's going to continue to spread outwards. You can think about it like a cup of coffee that you have when someone makes it, and all of a sudden it just continues to spread and spread and spread, that smell. And all of a sudden, before you know it, everyone's smelling the cup of coffee or that candle that's being lit. Hierarchical would be the spread of something that top down. Unlike contagious, where there's no barriers, hierarchical, there is this process. So it could be an example, a CEO, the board, they come up with a decision. They go tell the managers that this is what we're going to be doing. Give this information to eventually your floor managers. They tell the floor managers, eventually goes down to the workers. It's spreading in this top-down manner. Or if we're talking about fashion, we could look at fashion as an example. A lot of stuff originating in Paris, in France, eventually going to like New York, eventually spreading out throughout the Chicago, LA, going to some of our major urban areas. So here, it's not necessarily power with individuals, but we're looking at the size of cities. So that could be hierarchical. Reverse hierarchical, an example could be, I think pickleball would actually work. Starts off in a smaller area with a family. They create the game. Pickleball then starts to diffuse upwards to so there's friend groups, eventually going into larger cities. Eventually it goes national and kind of expands upwards. So we're starting at the bottom of a power structure now and moving up. And then the last one, stimulus, again, it changes that original idea. So like McDonald's, as it diffuses, oftentimes they will change their menu, they'll change their signage, they'll change how the restaurant looks because it is stimulus diffusion. They're adopting and changing to these different cultures that they're spreading to. But it's still McDonald's at the end of the day. So it's still McDonald's there. All right, going on to our next thing. If you do need more help with this, I do have a video just breaking down diffusion. It's got also some tips and tricks in it if diffusion is a little tricky for you, because you want to make sure you understand diffusion for sure. There's also a quiz there, 15 questions where there's different scenarios, and you're trying to then see what is the type of diffusion and also why it is that type of diffusion. So I have an example of one of the questions there too. So if you're interested, by all means, check it out. If you scan that QR code, or you can check back later on and you'll be able to find it. All right, going on to our next thing, we have our historical causes of diffusion. So one of the things that we can see here, colonialism, imperialism, trade, all of these things are going to impact diffusion. And this is all kind of like historical causes. So creolization, This is a vocab term you want to be familiar with. Generally, it's going to be connected to the colonization. So for example, we have the Creole language in Louisiana, which is a mix of a variety of different things from colonization. But here we have different cultures mixing, coming together, and they're practicing then a new language or cultural practice. Over time, it's kind of expanded this definition here. Lingua franca, you will want to make sure you have an understanding of this. Connects into our language part of the unit, but this also connects into historical causes. And the reason why I'm mentioning it as a historical cause is English is a lingua franca. And part of the reason why is because the British pretty much colonized the world. And so English was spread around the world. So it becomes a very common means now of communication for people who speak different languages. The next one I have up there is diaspora. It's not directly listed in the CED, but it's a good one to know because it's come up in a couple of different ways. It deals again with historical diffusion, generally of people, where they're moving from their homeland. And this could be due to forced migration, which remember we talked about in Unit 2. Forced migration is something out of someone's control. So for example, a historical event, the Atlantic slave trade, where we had enslaved people taken from Africa to the Americas. That would have created a diaspora. So important to kind of understand just that concept. Other things too with like colonization and imperialism. A lot of people ask, what do I need to know about history? You don't need to memorize the dates. You don't need to know all of the timeline. It's more important to understand how these different events, these big ones, colonization, imperialism, the Industrial Revolution, the Columbian Exchange, the Silk Road. You don't need to know all the dates or the people there. But what you need to understand is how did they lead to, in this case, diffusion, the spread of new ideas, of people, of agricultural practices and goods. How did they change different places? Remember, we're all about spatial interaction. So we're how these places interact. For example, during the Industrial Revolution, we saw more and more European countries wanting raw resources. And so eventually we have the Berlin Conference and this scramble for Africa. And that led to the colonization of Africa, which then led to resources being taken out, exploited from the continent, which then fueled economic growth in Europe. And we saw this cycle kind of form. And we'll talk about that Berlin Conference more in Unit 4. All this stuff in this class connects. It's a cool thing now that you're done. We can make so many connections to all the different units. All right, up next, I want to talk about some contemporary forms. This is going to be more modern day. So here, think about when we're looking at this of globalization, of the internet, urbanization, technology, the military, political trade, all of these different relationships that are being made. So that is important for today. And this is also why, because of how connected our world is, why a lot of different cultures, particularly indigenous and folk cultures, will resist some of this globalization and these internet advancements because they're trying to protect their culture. Because generally, the more connected we are, we start to become more influenced. And that could lead to cultural convergence, the next concept we're going to talk about. Real quick, we'll talk about more globalization in Unit 7. Urbanization will come up in Unit 6, so I'm not really going to talk about them right now to try and save time. The military, just think about, for example, the United States. The U.S., if you're in the United States, you don't really feel it or see it as much. But the military, our military is all over the world. And a lot of countries can feel that presence because we have bases all over. So American culture gets promoted in a variety of different ways. We have a lot of Hollywood movies. We have a lot of music that's very dominant. English as a lingua franca. It allows American culture to kind of get out a lot. So a lot of people see that. That is a way of contemporary diffusing. We can see the American culture diffuses. We also can see, too, a lot of people, for example, if we're going back to the military, we have military bases in all these different countries. People in these bases interact with different people in the country there. They pick up new food recipes, cultural trade, sayings. They come back home. It diffuses. So this leads to diffusion. So diffusion, always an interesting thing. All right, up next, creolization. I'll quick put this up here. No, sorry, not creolization. We already talked about that. Cultural convergence. So cultural convergence, remember, is this process. I got the definition there, which different cultures become more similar over time. So the more often that we are going to interact, the more often that we are going to see and be with other cultures, we are going to see cultural convergence occur. So that is going to be important to understand for cultural convergence. Now, there also is cultural divergence. So cultural divergence is going to be the opposite. Here we have cultures actually becoming more distinct. They're becoming more distinct from each other over time. So that is important to understand. We have convergence, more similar over time, and two, where we are actually becoming more distinct then. So 2 words that you want to have an understanding of. Make sure you got that down. All right. Next part, what I want you to do, we're not going to go in depth into all of the different religions and languages. We're actually almost done reviewing culture, but I want to just hit some of the highlights. There's a lot to all of these things. One thing I will say about the religions when we get into the culture unit, the religions of the world are fascinating, and there is so much cool history and culture and traditions to learn about with them. However, with the AP test, don't get too bogged down here. You want to understand how they impact the cultural landscape, maybe some of the big religious figures or the religious texts, or particularly those places of worship, because you'll see that in that cultural landscape. But you do not need to memorize all the dates. You don't need to know all the different scriptures or the different holy books and all the different psalms and verbs and all those things. We're focusing here again on how places interact. So up first, we have our first faith. We're looking at universalizing religions. So let me know in the comments, what would this religion be? And what would also be like a place of worship here? So universalizing religions, we're going to do a lot of kind of back and forth now with the chat here. So we got Christianity. It is Christianity. Christianity churches. Yes, churches. Christianity churches. Correct. So Christianity churches, Jesus would be a significant figure here. If we're looking at house of worship, again, it is going to be the church. So you'll see a variety of different styles of that. Our next faith. Did I skip one? No, I don't think so. Nope, I didn't. Okay, just want to make sure I didn't skip one. All right, what's our next one? What do we got? Again, universalizing religions. So as we're waiting on the chat here, also too, let me know holy place of worship for this faith as well. So as we're waiting on the chat, universalizing religions, as you can see, these are religions that are going to try to expand. They want to appeal to all different people. So they are looking to get more converts as they convert more people. They're trying to promote the teaching, and oftentimes may even change a little bit depending on where they are. Now, the fundamental like scriptures and stuff of that aren't going to change, but we can see some different nuances that can appear. And we do have it. It's Islam and the mosque. That is correct. So Islam and mosque. All right, up next, our next universalizing religion. What do we got? We'll make the picture a little bigger. All of these, again, it is Buddhism. So Buddhism and a temple, a pagoda. Yes, Buddhism, temple, pagoda. These would be following Siddhartha and his teachings, which uniquely enough does not have a deity. So this would be one of the religions that doesn't have a deity there. All right, our last universalizing religion. What do we got? And we'll see if you remember the picture there. What is it? This would be significant holy site here. It is the Sikhs. Yes, the Sikhs. So it is Sikhism. It's the Sikhs. So the Sikhs with the gurus, remember? We can also see too the distinct items of clothing. That also would be something that would show Sikhs as well. And yes, the Golden Temple. Correct. All right, up next, we have ethnic religions. So unlike universalizing religions, remember, ethnic religions are often centered around like one cultural or ethnic group, and they're often not going to spread out as much. If diffusion occurs, it's going to be mainly through relocation diffusion. And I should say, because I forgot to say that for the other faiths, diffusion is something you want to be aware of when it comes to religion. So all the other faiths have diffused through relocation. But when we're looking at universalizing religion, we'll also see hierarchical diffusion or contagious diffusion. Because again, those faiths are looking to add more people to the faith. And so again, expansion is additive. We are adding there. Relocation's not additive. You could join these faiths, but they're not necessarily trying to convert people and expand there. What do we got? It is Hinduism. Correct. Hinduism. We have temples here. Yes, Hinduism. Sweet. And our last one up, this is our last ethnic one. I will note there are many, many other religions in the world. They're equally interesting to study and look into. These are the only religions that are listed in the CED. So again, the CD is that course exam description. We want to make sure that we're following it because this is what the test is going to be based on. All right. And it is Judaism. Yes. And synagogues. Correct. Yes. The wall. Yes. Yes. Judaism. I'm trying to like click as many, but the chat moves so fast. As soon as I click one, it immediately moves. And sometimes I click the wrong one, which is fine. All right. Perfect. Let's go on to our next part then. We are almost done. It's going to be the languages. Now, we'll get to the language families in just a second, but this is a couple of vocab that you want to be familiar with when it comes to language. So isogloss, we got that boundary. Again, it's going to be defined by a linguistic difference. This isn't a boundary that you're necessarily going to physically see, but a lot of times too, dialects are going to actually create this. So a dialect is these regional variances in how we're talking. For instance, I all the time am told in the comments that I say agriculture wrong, that it sounds like agriculture because of how I pronounce my A's or my E's. There's a variety of things for pronunciation where you can tell I am from the Midwest. A lot of people too, when they think of the Midwest, maybe they don't think of how we talk like this. They would more think of like, oh, hello there. Welcome to Minnesota, home of the fresh homegrown tomatoes. Would you like some casserole? Don't you know? You know, it's pretty chilly out there. Oh, but you know, we got to get through that traffic season because, oh, you know, it's just so busy. So that would be more of maybe a Midwestern, the stereotypical thing that you see on TV. But that is definitely not how I talk. Maybe it is though, and I don't know. Who knows? So that'd be example of dialect. Isogloss, again, is the boundaries. Endangered languages are ones that are at risk of just disappearing, like no one's going to be actively practicing. And then a dead language is where that native community is no longer speaking the language anymore. And so again, this is also why many cultures are going to be resistant to contemporary diffusion and modern day technology. Folk and indigenous cultures want to protect their unique cultural heritage and traditions. Language is one of those. And so they don't want to necessarily be on TikTok and all these things because that promotes more of the global culture, which promotes more of a homogenized world. So diversity there makes things a lot more interesting. All right. With the language families, for time, because all these live streams have been going really long, I'm not going to go into all of them. In the Ultimate Review Pack, if you go, I got a little cheat sheet. It looks at the different language families. There's some kind of tips to try and remember where they're from. I also have a quiz too that you can take to try and see if you can identify it. You don't need to know all the different aspects of every branch and every different group. It's more focused on maybe where they locate. And if you're going to focus on anything else, maybe how they diffused. That would be it. I would spend maybe a little bit more time with Indo-European, just because it also connects into lingua franca and is diffused so far. But if you want, that would give you a little bit more information. Again, though, don't get bogged down. If you're trying to figure out what to study right now and you're like, all right, I'm trying to see, should I study languages for a whole day, but I have no idea about Unit 4, I wouldn't suggest that. So definitely review it because it could be on the test, but also make sure you're prioritizing your time accurately. So, all right, we're going to go on to our next one. We're almost done. We only got like 2 more things left. Our next thing is going to be centrifugal and centripetal forces. This is kind of ending out the unit. And we've already identified these. So I want to just talk about how it connects to culture, because later we're going to talk about how it connects to politics. And then eventually we'll look at other factors of devolution, which we'll talk about in our Unit 4 video. But centripetal forces, remember that P for pull, pulling together. We can see cultures that are more homogenous might have more centripetal forces if everyone's very similar. Cultures that speak the same language, very easy to communicate, that can unite people, bring people together. Cultures that are going to do placemaking, community events, transforming these places for the community to gather. That could be a centripetal force. Centrifugal is going to be forces that divide. They force us apart. They're dividing our cultures here. So with centrifugal forces, it could be if a culture speaks too many different languages and people can't communicate. that could create a bridge there between, or not a bridge, a gap between different individuals, which could lead to cultural divergence, where we start to see differences happen because of a lack of communication. Or if people are isolated, we start to eventually see cultures will diverge and start to separate there and start to have their own uniqueness start to form. So you want to be able to kind of connect centrifugal and centripetal forces to culture. Eventually, we'll talk about politics. That could definitely be an FRQ. It could be on the multiple choice. So these are two terms that do come up throughout this whole course that you want to be familiar with. All righty. Our last part now. Very last one. We are at the last end of this, and then we're doing the Kahoot. So get ready there. What we're looking at here is some effects of diffusion. So I want to just highlight, we have assimilation, acculturation, syncretism, and multiculturalism. These are going to be important to have an understanding of, as you may see them on the test. So assimilation, this can be forced. This can also be voluntary. So there's kind of two things that could occur there. Again, depending on the action. Forced is going to be out of someone's control. Voluntary, obviously, is in their control. But this is when an individual is going to be giving up actually their culture for the dominant culture of the society. So that is important to understand there. One thing that happened in the past, we saw, like with the United States, there's forced assimilation with indigenous people with schools where indigenous children were taken. The goal there was to kind of convert into, quotes, American culture. Acculturation is going to be when cultures adapt and change certain cultural traits, but they're not going to lose it. Syncretism is one that you don't want to get confused with. This one trips a lot of people up. Syncretism is where we're looking at the merging of these different religions, cultures, these schools of thought. And what starts to happen then is they start to change. So, and actually, I apologize, I was reading too fast and trying to also get the Kahoot up at the same time. Syncretism is where two cultures evolve. They change over time in a similar manner. They're not merging. So like Sikhism, Buddhism, there's religions that have had that happen. So syncretism, again, occurs there. We're not merging together. So like Sikhism had influences from Islam and Buddhism, but they still remain distinct. So that would be an example of syncretism. Multiculturalism, people coexist together within a larger society. I do want to highlight too, some people were asking earlier, the difference between creolization and syncretism. Originally, creolization was really just focused on linguistic and cultural blendings that occurred there. So this is these diverse people, and generally through colonization or trade or things of that nature. Over time, it's kind of expanded. So syncretism often is looking at religion and cultures, these schools of thought. Creolization used to be really focusing on linguistics, but has expanded kind of over time there. So hopefully that helps with that. All right, that is the end of our Unit 3. What we are going to do now, and I'm going to get our Kahoot up.